saw this call and actually really quickly came up with the notion of doing something like the yo-yo machines. And in fact, the idea also kind of sent me on a journey to my past, because yo-yo machines kind of bring together research that I've been doing for like the vast majority of my career at one time or another. So just to give you an idea of that, when I graduated, when I got my PhD in the late 80s, I moved to Rank Xerox Cambridge Europark from California, which some people think was crazy. And at Europark, I joined a small group of people. It was kind of a sister lab to Xerox PARC. And Bill Buxton, who was one of the chief scientists there, had worked with Tom Moran, who was leading the place, to put together a big audio video network within the building so that we could study what was called media space. Media space research had been going on at PARC, and then we took it up really quite avidly. And it was this notion of looking towards the future when we'd all be connected online and doing work online using online tools, but also video and audio connections, just like we are today. But in those days, that was impossible. You really couldn't shove video around the internet very well at all. In fact, I was at Europark when the World Wide Web was first kind of announced. And so instead, what they did was wire the building for lots of analog video and audio, all connected to a big central switch in a server room that we could control with our computers to connect various signals, video to camera, video cameras and stuff like that. So we lived with that for like the 5 years I was there, and just played with it and invented new things with it. And that gave us this really kind of sneak preview into the world we're living in now, what it's like to try to use video. The thing that we discovered fairly quickly is that video is good for a lot more than face-to-face communication. So the kind of thing that Zoom and Teams supports, this kind of let's stare at each other's faces for an hour, is only a fraction of what you can do with video and what's actually really effective to do. So we explored a number of things which we tended to gloss under the notion of peripheral awareness, the idea that when you collaborate with people, you're not always sitting across the table talking to each other. You're also seeing each other out of the corner of your eyes. You're aware of what they're doing. You might look at things they're working on together, things like that. And so we came up with a number of systems to try to recreate that at a distance. The visual record of that time is really sketchy. This is the best picture that I could find of a system we used called Portholes, which was kind of done by, I think, Paul Durish and Sarah Bly at PARC. And it allowed us to connect to people at PARC over the internet. But because we couldn't stream video, it basically sent little snapshots from our office cameras every 10 seconds or so. So these were, as you can see, low resolution, monochrome images. They didn't update very quickly, but they were really effective at just giving us a feeling for who was around and something about what they were up to, maybe whether we could give them a ring or whatever. Over time. And they just sat in the background. They weren't demanding. They were good. It was good. Equally, we did other stuff. We had a number of video connections that were unusual by today's standards. So we were allowed to glance at each other's cameras. We would just make a very short connection to see what somebody was up to. And we kind of overcame privacy concerns by playing sounds into people's offices. We did stuff that was a bit sillier too. We noticed that we had a video camera in a common area, and we noticed that people would overlook it. So we mounted a camera in a big mannequin to make it more kind of salient. Anyway, I won't go too far. The real message of this research is that there's more you can do with video than we're doing now, and a peripheral awareness is really important. So I'll go forward a few years, and I left Xerox Europark, and I joined the Royal College of Art, where I worked at the computer-related design studio and sort of learned to become a designer. And a lot happened there, but the thing I'll tell you about now is that in 1996, we had a master's student, Rob Strong, who for his final project started to put together a series of devices that were designed to connect separated levers. Again, the visual record isn't great. But this is a picture of kind of my favorite, or the one that was first in the list. It's called the Feather. And the notion is that if you're traveling away from your loved one, you would carry a kind of electronic picture frame with you. And as a minor detail, when you picked it up, your body would complete a circuit that would then send a signal to your home. And the kind of action is here in the Feather device. It's a kind of waist-high table with a big plexiglass cone on top and a fan mounted in within. So when it's turned on, the fan blows the feather around inside this cone as a kind of poetic, I don't know, a poetic embodiment of your thought and your wish. So there were a couple of other designs he did. And this is, to my knowledge, the first kind of exploration. Well, certainly directly, there's been stuff, precursors that are related, but this is the first real proposal for devices that would connect separated lovers emotionally in this way. And it led to a bit of, it led to a bit of other activity along those lines in the following years. There's a bunch of it. So Heather Martin, who was a student at the RCA and later worked with me on a project or two, joined IDEO and did the KISS communicator, which is a device you blow into to create colored patterns of light that you can send to a partner device. Or people from MIT made a system called In Touch, which allowed you to communicate haptically. And there's a variety of things like that. There were also a couple of commercial projects. So the doll lamp, which I don't know a lot about, was a kind of ambient information display for things like stock market data or weather, but it also allowed you to send lights to each other. And a student of Heather's, who again was a student of ours, named I've forgotten her first name, Deshanta Sonsino, commercialized the Goodnight lamp, which she developed as a student project, which were essentially two lamps connected together so you could send light back and forth. And you will see a lot of these ideas recapitulated in the yo-yo designs. The thing about a lot of this work is that it was not super accessible to people. So a lot of the kind of student work were prototypes. Rob's, for instance, was never actually connected on the internet. And as far as I know, I'm not sure In Touch was, as a variety of these things, it never actually worked. They were proposals. And so there's very little, experience of people who lived with them for long periods of time. To my mind, the kind of active interest in emotional communication sort of waned after Joe Fish Kay published some work about what they called the 1-bit communicator. And what he did was he set up a system on a computer screen with just this little tiny indicator, like a little colored button. And when you pressed on the button, it would turn red on your partner's screen and then slowly fade out over time. And he showed, he tried that out with couples. He tried it for several weeks, possibly months. And he showed that actually did mediate their feelings of emotional engagement quite effectively. And what I loved about that is he just stripped it right back to the essentials. He got rid of all the decoration and the feathers and the, and all that, and just said that little bit of communication is what you need. Now we've put it back, but it's a really nice piece of work. Okay, so go forward a few more years, and I left the RCA and formed the group that I currently work with at Goldsmiths in University of London. And so we call ourselves the Interaction Research Studio, where in the olden days, we used to be physically housed in this building. And we have a really lovely studio that I haven't seen for a year, and where we work and do our research. And this is kind of the current instantiation of the team. So there are about 10 of us. We're all non-student postgraduate researchers. Most people are funded on research contracts. But we've been working together, most of us, for years and years. So as long as 10 years, and everybody has been with us for more than 4 years or 5 years. So really well-established team, made up of basically kind of a combination of designers of various ilks, product designers, graphic designers, and so forth, and creative technologists. So we have some very strong technical people who've been working with us. One person who really needs pointing out is Andy Bauscher, who has been my partner in all this for a really long time. So we started working together something like 21 years ago at the RCA, and pretty much everything that I've done, is basically at least half his. Anything you like, he's probably done, and anything that kind of annoys you is probably my work. So that's who we are. Anyway, what we do is what we call kind of research through design. So the core business of our studio is making computational products of various sorts, usually not for the home, often quite playful or even confusing. And we are really committed to trying those with people kind of in the wild over long periods of time, because the things we make aren't really task oriented. It's how people engage with them that really finishes them in a sense. And we've been doing this for a long time, and we've been doing it for about 20 years. We have a portfolio that's kind of, I'm quite proud of. We've touched on many issues, and we've developed a kind of style for our work. One of the things that we've been working on lately is for a long time, when we made things, we made one or two of each thing we made, really highly finished prototypes, but only one or two of them to try out with people. And that was kind of frustrating because it meant first that we couldn't really do very large studies. And also, as designers of these things we think are kind of cool, we really like more people to be able to engage and try them. So we've, over the last, I don't know, 7 years or so, we've been trying to various strategies to circulate our products more widely. We went through a period where we batch produced products, culminating in production of 130 data catchers. But that turns out to be super expensive and really time consuming. And so, and even so, the enormous amount of effort we put in still only ended at 130 devices. So lately we've been turning to designing things that people can make for themselves. And probably the biggest project that we've done and may ever do in this area was the design of something we call the My Nature Watch camera, which are wildlife cameras that take pictures of stuff when they see movement that you can put out in your garden to capture pictures of birds or animals or so forth. We did that kind of in conversation with the BBC Natural History Unit. And after much work, they ended up featuring it on their Springwatch series. And Springwatch, well, I'll let you discover it for yourself. It's a great program, and it was a great experience all through. But anyway, the real point for us is that Springwatch reaches about 2 million people live on the night of broadcast, plus many, many others through catch-up TV and stuff. So without going through the whole story, that it's ended up that aired in 2018. People are still making these cameras, and there's still a really active community of users. And in fact, we've just released some new software for them. And we estimate, probably conservatively at this point, that about 3,000 people have made them. So this is an approach we find really interesting at the moment. And so that's my little tour through the past. And what you get kind of is that the stuff on awareness from Park, with emotional communication from the RCA and beyond, plus our experience of creating research projects, plus these notions of self-build devices, all kind of added up to this moment where we could build these simple little yo-yo machines and try to release them onto the world. So that's kind of what they're about. Let me tell you a bit about the designs. Again, there's 9 variations. The basic designs, I'll tell you about the basic designs, less about the variations. The first one we released is called Light Touch, and it's a device that allows you to trade colored lights with your partner. So it's got a kind of capacitive sense button built into it and 2 LEDs. One is a LED that you control, and the other is an LED controlled by your partner. So you could, if you hold down on the capacitive sensor, you cycle through colors, and when you find a color you like, you tap on the sensor and it goes to the other device. And that's all it does. And your partner can send one back. And yeah, of course, from the history, other people have traded lights before, but we're not ashamed. It's still a nice idea. Okay, so that's that one. The next one we released is called Speed Dial, and it's meant to be kind of like a mood barometer that you can share with your partner. And it's basically, there's a couple of configurations, but essentially you direct a servo motor to to position a pointer at one of 7 options of messages you'd like to convey. And so with your partner, you agree a set of dials to use, and you can exchange simple messages that way over time. So, this is an example of suggestions of things your partner might do, or maybe things you are doing, taking a tea break, doing the dishes, having a walk, or so forth. But of course, you can come up with any dial you want to with your partner. And half the fun is kind of agreeing dials. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that one later. So, whoops. The third device we made, again, this has been done before in a lot of ways, but we did it too, is called the Knock Knock. And it's essentially a box with a piezo mic inside that kind of hears it when you knock it, and then sends a signal to the partner that recreates the knock and its timing and all that using a solenoid. So it's, again, really simple, but it creates a moment of real-time connection that can be actually quite expressive for all its simplicity. And then the last device, which is, well, I have several favorites at this point, but this is another of my favorites, is called Flutterby. And it's a slightly different style. It's got a PIR, a passive infrared sensor mounted in it, and it basically signals movement to the remote location. So if you move in front of it, it triggers something on the remote location. There's several designs. This is one that I currently like a lot, which is called the Ribbon. And basically, there's a little tiny fan mounted in the roof of the device and a ribbon dangling from it, so that when it gets triggered, it circles around and the ribbon kind of makes interesting patterns and floats around, which you can also see as a nod to Natalie Jeremijenko's Live Wire, if you want. And so that's it. So the idea is that you just basically get this connection with a distant location. And I should say one of the appeals of this one is that the motor it uses is absolutely quiet. So when it triggers, it makes almost no sound, except for perhaps if the ribbon brushes against the casing. And that's a really interesting effect. It's really kind of otherworldly to have really rapid movement, but no sound. So that's the four basic devices. You can go look at the variations we've made. Some of them are quite different, but they're all kind of working on the basic principles. And what's been interesting about this project has been really fast. We did all these in 6 months, which is extraordinarily fast for us. And what's interesting, having had all this background in these devices, is that for the first time, we have 4 working, robust devices that explore these kind of emotional and peripheral awareness, and they create a kind of portfolio that is distinguished along a number of dimensions. So, you can look at the different media we're using, and in particular, their kind of pervasiveness. So you can hear a knock anywhere. You have to look at, say, the Flutterby to see it's moving, or the dial to read what it says. So some things kind of spread their presence in a space, and others are much more localized. They also vary in persistence. So I think I forgot to tell you that much like Joefish has designed the light touch, when you trigger a light, it fades slowly over time, over a period of about 6 hours. So some of these things are much more persistent than others. And there's also a kind of factor of deliberation of whether you actually intentionally send a message, as with the light touch or knock knock, or whether it's much more passive, as with the Flutterby. And just having access to all these dimensions, and you could probably name a few others, in a set of devices at the same time is really interesting to think about what works and what doesn't and why. So that's sort of, to a degree, homework for the future, but it's quite a resource. As I said, yo-yo machines are all self-build devices, and this whole methodology of releasing self-build devices has been interesting because it affects the way we design things quite a bit, actually, really all the way through. But the result is, because the aim is that people should be able to go to our website, yoyomachines.io, write that down, and follow instructions to make the devices without actually having to talk to us or have any support. So there's a couple of things involved in that. One is, no, I'll just go through it and then I'll tell you. I'll sidetrack. So if you go into Yo-Yo Machines, you see some information about the project and some about the different designs, and then you can go in and find instructions for making each of them. And the instructions, which we've kind of learned how to do over several projects, are like really thorough recipes for making an electronic device. And I want to impress that it takes a lot of work coming up with working on instructions, because it is really easy to kind of not make things clear enough. So this is the progress. What is it? It is the outcome of much work. Anyway, so this is what you'll find. And one of the things we do, the yo-yo machines are relatively simple, but they do involve a fair amount of wiring, and you also need to upload firmware to the, we use ESP32S chip platforms and stuff. And so walking through how to do that really simply is, it's a challenge. It needs to be done well. I should say that when I said it affects our design, our design of the devices is done with ease of making in mind. So for instance, we use breadboards as a basis for all of them, just because it makes it really easy to attach wires where they need to go, where you wouldn't really do that on a final product. And equally, our creative technologists worked really hard to have a system where you can upload the firmware to the device quite simply in a kind of two-step process, which is much simpler than it might be if you were doing it in a kind of traditional hacky way. So the other thing we of course have is instructions for making the various enclosures for the device, which is like something out of Blue Peter. So it walks you through what you need to do. And that's kind of basically what you find on the website. So what we've been doing lately is, the project is kind of done, but the success of a self-build project really relies on how well you can publicize it, how well you can let people know. And that's a really challenging aspect of this stuff. So my Nature Watch worked really well because the device was shown on Spring Watch. It's been much harder for us to kind of cut through the noise with the yo-yo machines. So we've been working hard to use social media to advertise them, Twitter, Instagram, even TikTok now, with various stories about them. But, it's worked okay, but stuff kind of gets lost in the endless stream of tweets. We've also been covered quite a lot in the specialist design press. So we've been in Design Week, and I don't know, we've been in like 5 publications and websites now, including Designio, which is really, really nice design magazine that we are quite proud of appearing in. And we've also picked up by the UKRI itself, who published about the project on their website. And this is all great, but it's kind of, in a way, not good enough because it doesn't reach enough people, and it doesn't reach enough people to build them. So lately, we've been really trying to crack how to get into the mainstream press more effectively. And as an aside, we have approached various places ranging from the One Show to the Guardian, but nobody's really bitten yet. And it's a mystery to me why not. I don't know why this wouldn't be an appealing story, but it hasn't happened yet. So you should write into the editors and demand they cover them or something. Okay, and I think I'll just kind of end with talking a little bit about my own experiences with yo-yo machines, because I have indeed used a couple of them so far. So this is a version of the Light Touch that I kind of designed, which is not on our website, but I quite like it. And that's actually sitting on the desk where I am currently speaking to you from. And in fact, I am reaching out and touching it now. I share the Light Touch with my mother and have done for several months now. So she lives in California. She's in a kind of residential community. She is 92 on Saturday. And we haven't seen each other for more than a year. It's been really hard. And we Skype, and we Skype occasionally. We have a weekly, not Skype, Zoom. Skype is so old school. We have a weekly Zoom call with my brother and sister and her, and I will occasionally call her else other times. We exchange email, but it's kind of too much and not enough. I don't know about you, but Zoom calls can get a little demanding. And this thing just actually has worked really well just to keep us kind of in touch with each other without that overhead. So we use it 2-3 times a day. One of us will refresh the light on the other machine, absolutely kind of religiously. So she sends me a light before she goes to bed because she knows I'll see it when I get up because we're on different time zones. She tells me she really likes it if I send her a light because if she wakes up at night, she likes seeing it. I am quite regularly, I'll be sitting at my desk here doing something, and all of a sudden the light will appear from her and I'll send her one back. And it's really, it's heartwarming. It's actually really nice. It's actually genuinely a moment of connection for us. And, she's my mom and she likes me and she wants me to do well in my career. So she's biased, but she'll only go so far, right? And there was a kind of telling moment when her light touch dropped from her shelf and broke. I mean, basically the wire came disconnected. And I thought this was disastrous because she is 92 and 3,000 miles away. And I thought, she'll never fix it. I'm going to have to make a new one and ship it to her. But actually, she was so motivated to keep using it that we worked together. She sent me photos and we Zoomed and all this, and she managed to fix the device from afar. And, she's my mom, she's biased, but actually I took that as really her being motivated to continue using it. And we continue to use it. And I think it's been probably about 3 months now. And that's pretty extraordinary if you think about it. So that's one example. The other example, this is the other side of my desk, and this is more like what my desk looks like now. It's a mess. I have a speed dial, and I share the speed dial with my brother. And he lives in New Orleans. He's actually my twin. But he's quite far away. I haven't seen him for a long time. We Zoom occasionally, all the same. And so we built speed dials together, and we've been using it for, well, now it's probably over a month, maybe 2 months. And it's been interesting. At first, it was really frustrating because we had a set of dials, and the first thing you notice is that whatever dial you have, whatever you actually want to say is not on the dial. So in the beginning, I would be frustrated by that, and I'd send him an email and go, Don, could you switch to the dial that says, whatever, the film quote dial? But then that seemed ridiculous because I'm emailing him to tell him to use a different communication medium. So that just seems stupid. So we ended up writing days of the week on the dials, and we've been using that ever since. So every day every once in a while we slip up. Like he sent me a message last week and referred to it in an email, and I was like, dude, you've got the wrong dial. So you can get these weird mismatches. But on the whole, it works. And in fact, we just now finished negotiating a couple of new dials to replace a couple that we found a bit more boring. So we've been using that, and it's been kind of fun. It's very different than the light touch. It can feel very immediate. Every once in a while, he'll switch around the dial when I'm there. But on the whole, it's a kind of longer term, lower frequency use, but it's still kind of fun. And I'm now in the process of negotiating a Flutterby with my sister, but we haven't quite got it going yet. So I'll let you know in the future. Anyway, again, I don't always live with the things we make in our studio. In fact, it's relatively rare, but I've been living with these things for a while now. And I guess, these are some of the dolls I've made with my brother. And I particularly point out the top dial, which personally, I want to give a reward of a yo-yo machines kit to anybody who can identify what that dial refers to. Okay, I'll answer later. So we've got a bunch of different dials. One of my favorite is the one we're using today, which is film quotes ranging from frankly, I don't give a damn to, use the force or whatever. So anyway, okay, so we've been using that for a while. And all I can say is based on my experience, when I say that these are things that you can easily build and use to keep in touch with your family, from my own experience, that's just absolutely true. They are really easy to build. I did it myself, and they really do help you keep in touch with your family. And so we now figure that about 100, maybe a few more people have been making these devices, and we're just waiting for more reports of what people do with them. And I should say, if people are interested in trying them, we have some kits we could send away to you to give them a shot if you want, in return for you actually telling us what you do and first of all, doing something with them. So I think that's all I've got, and that's my time. So questions, comments, anything?
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well,
if you have a question, sorry, I'm trying to, there we go. You can raise your hand and raise your hand and then unmute yourself. We'll try and monitor the chat. But first things first, buy a boat.
Yeah.
It's gonna bother me. What does that mean?
Oh,
I'm like, it's right there.
Yeah, you kind of have to be, you might have to be American. Does anybody know what that refers to
No.
in the chat?
I'm like, I feel
Okay.
like I do know. I'm like,
No, you probably don't, but and it's really cheesy, but it comes from a song that my daughter and I really like, from a guy named Kenny Chesney, who's the kind of new country singer from the US. And the song is called Get Along. And it's a cheesy, heartwarming song that is well worth listening to. So that's why we used it. That's not my usual musical taste, I'll have you know, but I really like his stuff.
So I guess if no one has a question, I'll kick it off because I have
There's
questions.
Raise hand.
Oh, there are raised hands. I was at the bottom. There we go. Sorry, Anne. Go ahead.
Okay, I might have a starter. Yeah, first of all, thank you. I think I'm definitely gonna build one with my kids and probably send one to my parents, because I think this is really, really cool. And I think when you say about like Skype is not enough, too much, I think it's really described like well the situation. So definitely gonna be looking into this weekend. The thing I wanted to chat about is kind of like a bit philosophical, I guess. It's because when you said about you wanted to reach more people, I immediately thought about kids, right? And I especially thought about kids. Of my kids receive, for example, a box of craft called KiwiCo. I think, every month you can have like a bunch of things, coming in. And I think that I thought my first thought would be that would be a great way maybe to have more people to reach it, because I feel like maybe the building is one thing, but there is also the time it takes to make, and some people are just becoming a little bit lazy, I guess, with that. But I think it goes deep down to, I guess, like for me, a fundamental problem in the society, which I'm totally in, which is we tend to buy more than making things ourselves anymore, right? And I'm wondering if there is not something to think about how we can encourage people to reuse, and so that would go also with this sort of whole question of sustainability. So have you thought at all about that?
Yeah, I can kind of talk around that a little bit. So yeah, that part of, we started doing the self-build stuff because we wanted to try larger field trials, but actually we're really interested in now for kind of political reasons, that we think being able to make your own technology is really great for people to kind of see beyond the stuff they use, to see under it and understand a little bit about the fact that it's constructed and perhaps could be otherwise. And also to try to kind of break the hegemony of Silicon Valley over what we think computational devices are and how they're going to mediate our lives. So building these things as self-build devices is a way also for us to try to disseminate things that are out of the ordinary and that capture different kinds of experiences, but also things that are really accessible, that you own in a very different way than you do if you buy it. But, the thing is, well, we're, in a sense, we've been working on this for a while, but we're kind of just learning how to do it. And the problem is you end up recreating certain forms of capitalism. Like we are now really about to recreate advertising. Like we're trying to rely on word of mouth and mass media, but it's not easy to really get the attention. And so I'm beginning to understand why you pay money to get people to do that job for you, which is kind of weird. And as you say too, you have to, there is this thing about this, I don't know, this balance I don't really understand yet about how appealing something seems to somebody and how much work it seems like it'll be to make. And I think I agree with you. I think in this current lockdown, I know for myself, I'm just kind of tired and don't want to do anything, and people, I just think it takes a lot to get people to stir and actually make something like this. So trying to get that balance of making it absolutely as easy as possible and obviously easy, and then trying to make it seem as appealing as possible. That's a tricky one. I don't really know it yet. I should say that we've been really reluctant to go through kids with this stuff or with the Nature Watch camera, because that's a really easy thing to do in a way. It's always like do workshop with kids. but it also implies that that's kind of the target audience for these designs. And it's, it's fine. We like kids making them. We want them to communicate with their grandparents and all those good things. But actually, these things are for everybody. And we kind of want to slightly insist that these sorts of playful devices and expressive devices, well, grown-ups can be like that too. It's okay. In fact, it's good, And so that's why we don't want to just market it as a thing for kids.
I definitely agree. I buy Legos for me more than my kids.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Osama, if you want to ask your question.
I do. Thanks, Bill. So I guess it's something that builds a little bit on what you were saying, this idea of trying to break away from the ordinary, the capitalist hegemony of how we should be doing things. And I wondered whether you're also looking for getting people to break away from your hegemony as a designer yourself. Like, do people, like, for example, I was thinking when I was seeing these devices, and it's a really interesting design space. Some of them are fairly compatible. And I wondered whether people are connecting, but sort of mixing and matching things and maybe connecting in different ways, or like at the basic level, just using different devices, like not use the same thing here and there. And I'm curious whether this is actually even something that you're interested in to look into, maybe something that you're waiting to analyze or collect data about. I'm not sure if that's even a target for you, but I'm curious what your thoughts about that. So the kind of appropriation that's in that maybe these things afford, and to what extent you're allowing people to break away from you.
Yeah, we're totally open to people appropriating them. That's one of the real pleasures of doing them as self-build devices, that it's kind of relatively easy to break the rules, but it comes in levels. So, making different enclosures for the devices, and there's been any number of versions of light touches done by different people that are aesthetically quite differently and functionally quite differently too. So that, different enclosures is easy. Then it's also possible to kind of muck around with the electronics a bit, and all the code is on GitHub so that hackers can go in and mess with the code. It's a little bit harder to kind of plug things in different places and get different effects, because they've been the boards are programmed pretty much for a single device. So it's not quite so clear how you can hack them in that way, and maybe something to attend to in the future. And in terms of kind of mixing and matching devices, yeah, you could do it. I don't know I don't know if anybody's tried it, and I don't know quite what the experience would be. Some things would probably be fine, and others would probably just be really confusing. But I'm open to it. We're totally open to people doing what they want with these things. I should say one of the interesting uses of the knock that we found was this guy in the Netherlands who built a set, but he actually did it to communicate with his teenage son who lives at the top of his house, and apparently holes up in his room, playing computer games all day. And so they made a knock in the kitchen so they could say it's time for dinner. And the one in the son's room is like a laser cut, I think it's a penguin, where the solenoid taps a bell, and it's got a little speech bubble coming saying "Time for lunch, my lord," something like that. So it's not exactly deep appropriation, but it is certainly not what we expected either.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, if I can sneak in another one, and I'm curious about this idea of reaching people. And when you see things that are easy to make, like this DIY, people can make by themselves. We always think about people in developing countries and the stuff when people don't have resources to get that. And I wondered whether you're thinking about that, or whether you're reaching beyond the UK, beyond the whatever.
Well, we are. It's not a primary purpose of this project. I mean, we're really just trying to figure out how you build stuff and help people make it, and perhaps entice them to make it. And our experience is that this stuff travels pretty far. Like the Nature Watch camera has been built all over the world at this point. We have not made it a focus to reach out at kind of digitally disadvantaged people at this point, but it's certainly worth keeping an eye on.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, and then next we had Libby.
Hi, Bill. Hiya. I just want to say I'm a super fan of my nature watch, and you should all make one of those as well as making the yo-yo machines. They're amazing. But I wanted to ask you, Bill, have you thought about doing it for multiple people? So there are 5 different kind of sub-families in our family. I'd love to make one that somehow works for all of us rather than just any given pair of it. Have you looked at that at all?
Yeah, we haven't done it. We kind of it was a really quick project, and we made the choice pretty early on that we should stick to pairwise communication just because it's kind of easier to think about. But I'm, one of our secret plans is that we may try to do follow-up work on this, in which case doing some kind of more group things would be nice. I mean, I'm also would like that because, as I said, I share individual devices with various family members, and it would be quite nice to have one that's just kind of one big communal thing. But I think it's, it takes some thought into how you would design that well and how you make it work. One thing that I have thought, but we've never tried either, is what happens if I connect to a device that my sister has, and that same device connects to one that my brother has. So I can send a message to her, and she can send one to my brother, and he can send it back to me. But I don't know what would, I don't know if that would be nice or just stupid.
Thanks.
Yeah, pleasure. And nice seeing you.
And then next we have, I'm gonna say Steen.
Yes. Beautiful. Thanks. Thanks for the great, very interesting talk, and thanks to the Bristol group for inviting outsiders. That was great. So I was thinking about the speed dial project that you were showing, and it reminded me of a scene from the Martian film where he uses this old camera from this old Mars rover, where he has to set up these signs for the people back on Earth. And then the camera points to the different signs so he can communicate back to Earth and tell them that he's stuck on Mars. But it's very limited, the amount of signs that he has. So, he has a very constrained language. And that made me, the speed dial thing made me think about that scene, because what you said about you and your brother, and you were sort of negotiating how to communicate with this very constrained way of actually sending messages for each other. So I was thinking it's kind of an interesting, there's sort of an interesting, I don't know if it's a dichotomy or something, but so on the one side you have a very limited language, but then on the other side you have the possibility for a much more rich language than, say, if you were to communicate via email or via Skype. But I was thinking if you can maybe elaborate on how, if you found anything that related to how people actually negotiate, how they're communicating. I'm thinking, like, for example, with the light thing, you can make sort of Morsing patterns, or if there are any ways that the language sort of evolved throughout.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I like, and I actually, it makes me want to go back and watch that movie again, see if we get any tips. But I mean, we're kind of new at playing with this stuff still, in a way. So I can't give a great answer. I would say that there's a sense in which you let go of trying to do explicit communication with these things, because after all, you can use email and stuff. And so instead, with the lights, it's really easy to spin a story that different colors will mean different things and that you'll agree with them and all that. But my mother and I don't do that. We don't tend to do that at all. We sort of agreed a long time at the beginning that maybe blue would stand for we're done with this conversation for now. But it just doesn't work like that. So instead, we just send colors that we want to send. And I do find that I may have a feeling behind the color I send. So I often send a kind of orangey color in the morning. And at night, I'm almost certainly to send it blue as my last light, and then various things in the day. But there's nothing hard and fast about it. And I kind of think that's the way it should be. As an aside, it also turns out the lights you send, they mix. So I think part of the decision about a light to send is what's going to look like good with the other light, and so there's this negotiation of what looks nice. And I think that's as it should be. Equally with the speed dial, which is, much more explicit, I kind of was complaining to my brother at some point that I thought it was limited because you never had the message you want. And he said, actually, I really like that. He really liked it because it posed a kind of riddle to him and made it more like a game. You know, you're trying to say what you want to say with a really limited ability to say it. I think it means that often he's explained things he sent to me before, like, what did he tell me? He sent, our new doll has one of the choices is, oh Christ, what is it? Oh yeah, grilled cheese and tomato soup is the choice of meals. And he said he sent that to me because he'd had really bad news, and to him, grilled cheese was the comfort food. And, you know, I had no clue, right? But it kind of works anyway. I don't know. So again, I think you could be thinking a lot more about how people negotiate, but I think on the other hand, you could just kind of relax and say people are using these things in sort of playful, lighthearted ways, and that's a good thing. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we have Martin has a question, and then Aisling posted a question on the chat, which I'll ask after Martin's.
Great. I wanted to follow up actually on what you just said. So you've got sort of this, you're providing all of these things incomplete, and like the last step of the design is done by the recipient. They have to, you know, make the housing or design the thing. But there's a sort of scale of incompleteness where, like, something like the lights, it's just, you build a housing, you could just stick it through a paper plate or in a box that you already have or something. Whereas with the speed dial, you've got a real, like, you have to make an actual concrete design choice about what the 7 things that go on that are. And I was wondering, like, how you saw that working, especially, I mean, for yourself, you've already got an investment in the device because it's something you've made. But for people who don't already have that investment, how much that level of self-design is affecting their engagement?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure I see a huge difference in the amount of work the designs take, because I mean, at core, when you build something like the Light Touch, you have a breadboard with a processor on it and a couple of leads leading to LEDs. And it's like what you choose to do with those LEDs, that's kind of where the design is. And as you say, you can do just about anything with them, but what you do does make a difference. So you have to kind of make some choices there. And with the speed dial, I mean, I'm kind of telling you, it's just a matter of taking a servo and shoving it through a piece of card and you attaching a pointer to it. So it's really simple in a different way. So there's kind of, it's kind of, I don't know. I'm not sure there's a hard and fast, this is easy, this is hard, this is more open than the other. They're both kind of, sorry, I'm not babbling, but we release it, like the speed dial, we always release, you can go to the web and just follow instructions to recreate one of our designs exactly, and that includes the speed dial. So you can download a template for a bunch of dials and just cut out the dials that we've already designed. You don't have to think about it at all. You can just use ours, right? Or you can write your own. And similarly with the Light Touch, you can just follow instructions till it can make the paper plate enclosure, or you can go a little bit wild. So they're kind of, I'm not sure there's huge distinctions there. There's a bit of distinction in how easy it is to make some of these things, but I'm not sure even that's too killer. I guess we'll have to wait till we get more feedback. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I is sort of less about how hard it is to make and more how much investment people feel they have in it. So if you've designed your own set of 7 messages, do they feel more like this is a personal thing than if it's just an LED in a box?
Yeah, no, fair enough. Okay, sorry, wrong. Yeah, no, I think they probably do. I think the more that you kind of, I guess all of them are open to customization in one form or another. With Knock Knock, well, even the Knock Knock is open to it. So, and I think it's fair to assume that the more you do, the more you invest in it, you become. But we'll kind of have to see.
Cool, thanks.
So go and build them and tell me what happened.
So to ask Ashling's question, so she had said, paper plates are not meant to last. Also, what about novelty wearing off? And what are the chances of one person losing interest and then that causing an awkward ongoing engagement? So like if she has noticed that people have abandoned technologies over lockdown. So that has sort of killed certain things like the Zoom pub quizzes and such.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. It's real. So a couple of things. In terms of the longevity, it kind of depends on how you build them. And I did sort of worry that some of the things we're suggesting are pretty ephemeral. Whereas, as I said, I've been using this thing with my mom for months and I don't see any sign of us stopping. I guess that's up to the user. You can make them simply, you can remake them simply if you want, or you can actually spend a little more time and build something more robust. The light touch I made, because I did have to pack it up and ship it off to the States, I built it quite robustly. So I like slathered the thing in hot glue gun and stuff. It's one big mass of plastic behind the scenes. And so I think it will probably do okay. But I guess the other side is it does kind of bring up issues of maintenance too, which oddly I touched on a much earlier paper about a video window I built for my home. Once you build these things, if you really are going to live with them, you also get into a kind of form of maintenance work sometimes where you just have to keep it going and things will go wrong. Like I've had to remount the kind of capacitive touch button on my light touch a number of times. And that you kind of switch over to chore work sooner or later. And sooner or later, you might just stop, you might give up. And by the same token, it's absolutely true to say that these things may have a life cycle and one person may disengage before the other, and that could cause awkwardness. We saw that when that was something we became aware of years ago in Europark when we had all this video stuff going on, that people would, we became aware that if you build this kind of system where people can communicate, there then becomes a kind of demand characteristic where you should. And I definitely feel like my mother should send me a light. Fortunately, she feels the same way. I do. And I don't mean that because it's my professional career at stake. It's actually just because if she doesn't, I figure she probably doesn't love me anymore, and that hurts. So, and I think it goes both ways, so if you do share these things and somebody drops out, that is in a way this implicit message, but I don't know, life is dangerous. You just got to live with it, If you don't risk, you never succeed, something like that.
Well, I just wanted to note that it is 2:00. So for those who have to leave, but we do have a question from Lisa. So we will continue on, I guess.
Hi, thanks for the talk. It was really interesting. Also that we could join from the outside. And I do have a question of how do you evaluate the feedback from the people who made the devices, and also what is the general study goal or the research goal? And yeah.
Okay. Those are good questions and they're kind of hard to answer. So the general goal in a sense is like a demonstration proof. It's just saying we can do this and it'll work. And in particular, what we're, as I said, one of the things we're interested in is prospects for self-build products as a way of disseminating work and as a way of engaging people with topics and with technologies in new ways. The other project goal is to actually help people feel connected, particularly during the pandemic. And then the third is to learn something about the nature of these kind of devices and how they do connect people and what works and what doesn't. In terms of data, we're kind of very much in a design/ethnographic tradition where we work with, easiest to say is we work with qualitative data. So we work with what people tell us either in kind of informal interviews or communications. And often with this kind of project, we found just that looking at what people do on social media or on a builders forum is often indicative, gives us some information about what they're thinking about things and how they orient to them. And so I kind of made a break with scientific methods many, many years ago. And I don't pretend that what we're doing is kind of Um, it's not comprehensive. It's not controlled. It's kind of messy. It's anecdotal. But for me, I think that can be really useful in trying to gain insight to what we've done. So I hope that helps.
Thanks. Can I add just one little bit?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any like something feedback from the people who made it, that they developed their own ways or their own devices further on, like more interventions to get connected?
We don't have enough yet. I mean, it's been, hopefully it's early days, but we just don't have enough feedback from people yet, which is, again, why you should all go out and make them and tell me what happens.
I will. Thanks.
Thank you, Lisa. And you have a question?
Yeah, I have a kind of a very meta question, but I wanted to ask you that, but then you raised that, so I thought like, yeah, let's ask that. I wanted to I mean, obviously you've been like, in sort of more computer science, I would say hardcore, groups, and then you moved to design, you work with creative technologists, and you've mentioned about like you've been away from sort of like research practice. So I'm kind of like, I want to be a bit cheeky and ask you, what's your feel about like all these different, I don't know, fields or area or names we're tagging ourselves with, I'm a designer, I'm a computer scientist, or and where do you think we're going somehow with, it's kind of blurry, but like, we're in a world where we have lots of people creating technology and lots of different methods, and some people are more research, some people are more maybe product, and I'm wondering if you have like any kind of vision or opinion about like where this is heading somehow, or what you think. I don't know, it's a bit of a
that's a difficult question, isn't it? I mean, first of all, I do consider what we do research, and I have for years, so we use design, and I would strongly argue that it is a form of research, but I think it's a form of research that flirts with scientific forms of research, but doesn't commit. Don't quote me. I mean, we are aware that we are not doing sort of using scientific method in the cliched sense in the research we do, but we are very empirically grounded, and we do try to draw lessons from what we've done. So it is research, that's one thing. In terms of different disciplines and all that, I don't know. I've had a really eclectic background. I consider myself a designer now, but I'm not sure that how much that matters. I think more and more people are kind of putting together kind of portfolios of skills that they can bring, and they're often people are quite interdisciplinary in what they bring, and they're working. And I mean, actually, I'm reminded that I foolishly agreed to meet up with some people, do a thing for some people in Turkey in a couple of months where they want to talk to me about the future of technology, and I just can't make grand sweeping statements about this. I can tell you about kind of my little bit of the woods and what I think we're about, and people who are kind of fellow travelers. But in terms of kind of where everything's going, and I just have, it's complicated.
Thank you.
Fair answer. So I don't know if anyone else has a question, but I have a question, and this is gonna be less meta. It's gonna go back to your project. I had a question about what was the decision, or why did you decide to include both passive and active sort of interactions, and sort of what was the thought behind? Are you trying to figure out which works better, or what are you hoping to gain from those?
Well, it's kind of a mix. To be honest, a lot of what we would do when we, the way I tell the story, it's probably not entirely true, is we're kind of work as researchers and analysts at the beginning and end of projects. And in the middle of projects, we work as designers. And by that, I mean, we put down our theoretical analytical heads and just try to build things that are really good. We try to develop ideas that we find compelling and make them work as well as we can. So when we started working on these devices, I don't think we ever kind of said, I know we've done deliberate devices, we've done devices you have to use on purpose. Now let's do some that are more background. We just thought it was a cool idea. That's kind of partially the real answer. But I am aware, behind that, I am aware of these distinctions, and I'm kind of curious about how they operate. And I think we got the feeling that on the one hand, it's hard to know where to be. Like being able to really send a signal to somebody is fine, but it kind of moves you in a way, a tiny bit away from this notion that it's just a peripheral casual interaction. And we wanted to explore, I think with the Flutterby in particular, we really like the idea of something that would not require deliberation. It really would just be in the background of your everyday life and connect to places without you even consciously going, I'm now going to send a message. So somewhere in there, maybe there's an answer.
Yeah, no, that there was an answer. It was, we're seeing what happens. But I'm kind of curious then, building off of that, thinking of, you said the light sort of passively will, sort of diminish or change. So there's like overlap. Have you noticed any like sort of reactions to that? Because like thinking of the Flutterby, that's going to be more of like, if I don't notice it happen, then I won't necessarily notice that someone passed by or there was that presence. So I wonder just with the light, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the light's really important, certainly for my mom and I, because we are 9 hours apart, and so it's really good that we don't need to be co-present to see a signal of each other. It's a really powerful feature of the light touch for me. And the Flutterby is much more real time. It would be, I think that I haven't lived with it yet. I'm going to share one with my sister. I've played around with it in my own home, and it is very much an of the moment thing. But maybe that's part of the appeal. Like one of the things that's really quite striking about the light touch for me, it's nice because we always have lights that we're sending back forth. But when I see it happen at the time, when I see the actual light that she sent come on, there's a feeling of connection, of kind of presence there. That's really quite striking. It's almost like she's just on the other side of the wall, and so there is this moment of really feeling her presence. And I kind of imagine that's what the Flutterby will do, that it'll give you this very real-time sense of activity connected to your space. And it might be nice, like one of the stories anyway about the feather device was that once the feather had blown around, it would land someplace else. So you might notice that somebody had, I don't know how well that would have worked in practice, but it was a good story, right? And so you can imagine that you could combine something that has a really strong real-time presence with a trace of its having happened. But I'm not sure the Flutterby is that thing yet.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to find out. That's a really lovely story though, about the light and that connection. Because I think that's something that, email isn't quite the same. And no. I'm going to stop talking because Anne has a question.
I think it's just like an idea though, because I'm trying to think as well about when I personally would need that kind of connection. And I'm kind of excited because I just recently bought like a smartwatch that can track my stress level or whatever. But like, I feel like also it would be nice as well as an idea to sort of get that data maybe connected to those devices, because sometimes, you feel stress and you may want like someone else to know, like, oh, she feels stressed, so maybe I'm gonna communicate more, just send her a little something to say, calm down. So you can have like that kind of communication, which is also somehow indirect but triggering direct, or I don't know what, it's not really clear, but like, you know what I mean?
Yes,
like,
cool.
I'd like that.
Go build it.
Yeah. Yeah, I can
go make.
Yeah, I can hack it.
You can hack on one virus. I mean, I would say that you can't. I mean, you can. Well, it varies from device. Certainly, the speed dial is interesting because I'm settling down onto dials that have a kind of continuum from positive to negative affect. So, for instance, we have a dial that we use on Fridays, which is the 7 deadly sins, which is quite fun. So you can say whether you're a glutton or filled with lust or envy or whatever. But to be honest, it's kind of too negative, because there are times when you're happy, and not very often, but sometimes I'm happy. And all that. And so I kind of like a balance of the positive and negative. And in that way, you can start to indicate to each other when you are stressed and stuff like that. I think the light touch, nah, it's not really good for that. But speed dial's good. Knock knock probably would work pretty well. But it's certainly worth keeping in mind. Yeah.
Yeah, Richard, do you have a question?
Yeah, I've just ordered some bits, by the way, to have a go at them.
Okay.
I wondered if you'd seen any mapping between what people are using these for and the things you'd seen in your, what's it called, peripheral vision? That kind of, you talked about.
Peripheral awareness.
Yes, yeah, because
Yeah,
it's similar sort of.
Again, we don't have enough data yet, but yeah, I think it's very much along the same lines. In terms of peripheral awareness, I think probably the Flutterby is most in keeping with the kind of pure version of being aware of people at a distance without there being that much communication. Yeah. There's a bit, from some of the other things, but the Flutterby really is about just awareness of people being around and something about, well, very minimal information about what they're doing. These things probably really draw more on the emotional communication side of things than the peripheral awareness, which is interesting because it means there's that much more space to explore in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ali, go ahead.
Hi, really interesting talk. I just wanted to ask how you felt that this developed your way of communicating beyond these devices. So I'm particularly thinking about the one where you were sharing quotes with your brother. And I found that for me, I communicate with my siblings in a similar way and in day-to-day life. And it's sort of like a constantly developing thing of like, we have set quotes that we like to talk in. And then obviously when you're talking on the phone and in real life, that sort of develops over time. And whether you felt like having that device increased your flexibility because it was a way of communicating you wouldn't otherwise have, or whether it sort of shoehorned you into that and you'd want a way to update it virtually, or if that's just adding too much complexity to your devices.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't have a great answer for you. I think that there's a weird way in which the dials reflects the way we interact anyway. And in fact, and actually there have been a few occasions where what's on the dials comes back to our live conversations. Like we'll just mention them or mention a quote or just sort of refer to the dial, not explicitly, but like quote the dials in the way we're talking as a background way, which is kind of interesting. Maybe one of the things that's goes a little bit beyond that is because when we haven't made that many new dials, but when we do, we're each bringing suggestions to the table, and that's a slightly non-real-time interjection into a conversation that's slower than a live one, if that makes any sense. So I'll suggest stuff for dials that'll be a little bit weird for my brother to think about and vice versa. And it's like it brings a new way of bringing information into the kind of relationship between us, if that makes sense, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I like the idea that you could sort of almost send across an image of a dial. Like if you watched a film that you thought he'd be interested in, you could send across an image of a dial with a new quote on it every sort of few weeks.
Yeah, and it is really easy. I mean, I've just got a template and I can slap something on there and send a PDF to him. You print it out and cut it out, which is kind of fun. All right, surely you guys are tired of talking about this.
No, I'm not. I still have more questions because now I started thinking about when you came up with the instructions. How did you sort of test? Because I was thinking of the interaction of working with your mom when she broke it, like thinking about making easy instructions.
Yeah, to be honest, we just do it in-house. So like one of the many interesting things about this project is we've conducted the whole thing in lockdown from very start to finish, from doing the proposal to finish. So our studio has not been co-located for all that time. And a couple of people have gone into the studio occasionally to get stuff, but I haven't been there for a year, So we're doing it the way we're doing it now. We're doing it over, we use Zoom a lot. We use Slack and email and stuff like that. And so in part, what that means is when we develop these things, it's kind of like we come up with the concept, and then some of us start working on sort of form designs or whatever, kind of doing the design work, and the technologists meanwhile are trying to code up what we want. And when they would release code, they then have to explain to us how to do it. And so that became the natural backbone for the instructions. And when we engage with them, it's like I can do this stuff, but to a degree. But if you can get me be able to follow the instructions, you're doing pretty well, really. So we just developed it in that way by communicating amongst ourselves about how to do these things. And then we kind of got a feel, I guess, for going through instructions over and over again, trying to figure out what needs to be clear and what isn't quite there and what people might get confused by. And then when we start to release them to people, they give us feedback. And so like the Nature Watch instructions changed hundreds of times, and these things are up in the scores of times. It's just constant, re-editing and tweaking.
That makes sense. What was it like trying to work with your mom to fix it? Because as we've mentioned, so I work with older adults, so trying to relay instructions to people who aren't used to tech it's an interesting challenge.
Yeah, it is interesting. And I mean, in some ways you can be pretty superficial. You kind of go, she sent me pictures. I said, right, see the yellow wire? You need to put it here, it's sort of on that level of thing. And in fact, one of my vague frustrations maybe about things that I kind of want to work on in future projects is that you can take that same superficial approach to instructions for building the devices. And that means you can wire up all these devices and not really know how they work very much. So I'm kind of getting keen on kind of in a light touch way, doing a bit more explaining of what's going on technically as people build them. So we've got a little bit of that, and I'd like to push it a little further. And same with the software. It's pretty easy to upload the software and not really know what it's doing very much. And I'd kind of like to at least make that more available so people can learn from it. I don't want to be kind of, I don't want to be a super heavy, like we're going to bring knowledge to the masses, but I wouldn't mind it just being a little bit more available.
And sorry to jump in, but it made me think about like a personal thing that I've been thinking at the moment is cooking recipes. And I think it's kind of similar in a way and I'm wondering if there is maybe something interesting to think about, like you can describe a recipe for cooking in a very almost visual way, like, sugar, 100 grams, this put together, and you can have almost like a very simple way of doing it. And then you can, maybe I'm thinking about a little slider, you can have more detail. And then you can go to the very full cooking recipe where there is an explanation of why the sugar needs to be in the, this temperature because it crystallizes and whatever. And I'm wondering if there is also not something like that to do with instruction for DIY, because there are a bunch of people who are interested in sort of knowing about what is an LED and what's going on. And there is probably a range of person who just do not want. They just want to be able to sort of build that. And that would be interesting to see is this a continuous, is there some discrete, bits where we can sort of provide a bunch of information? And I don't know, I think that would be quite interesting, at least.
Yeah, it's really nice. I mean, I'll tell you what, making those instructions is already a lot of work. And I hear you talking with these layers of instructions, and I'm like, oh my God, that's going to be hard. But it's a nice idea, no question.
Yeah, Oli has gone like on Instructable, did some instruction for his work on spraying display. And I remember it was quite long as well to get through the right amount of detail.
Yeah, and you always miss so much. You think you've got everything there, and then there's someone who comes along in the comments and just asks questions.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a lot, but I think we've started working in little bits of information about the tech into the instructions, but I kind of like the idea of maybe linked, pop-up boxes or something that explain some of this stuff.
Cool.
Okay, well, we have almost gone to 2:30, so I'm sure,
And we got one
Bill,
more
you're,
question.
Can I
yeah,
squeeze in one more simple question? I
Yeah.
was wondering, during your presentation, you mentioned that you're engaging with this prototype or this product more than the other works that you've built on, maybe. Do you have any idea why you're more inclined to interact with this one or to live with this at home compared to the others that you've worked with?
Oh, I would have liked to have worked with them all. I love everything we've made. They're all my favorite children, But in a sense, I mean, there's probably a combination of things. So the stuff that we've made before often has been kind of more difficult to transport. So actually bringing one home would be a job. And that just makes you go, yeah, I can't be bothered. Probably there's not as much payoff. It's not necessarily easy publishing your own account of living with something. So what's in it for, I'm not sure what it does for my career. My house is already a cluttered mess. It's absolutely full with stuff. And so one more thing is going to be difficult and possibly vulnerable to our messy living habits. And, combined with that, this is stuff that we actually designed in our homes. I made and designed everything, all the work happened in my home. So it's here, just became very natural to use it. And I was very motivated to use it with my mom. So I think it's really more that I haven't used stuff before because I'm kind of lazy and flawed and like to leave work behind than that I don't like it, I have that kind of works.
So do you think that also the fact that it is kind of low fidelity and you make it yourself at home, that has an effect on it, that you actually start to use it more as well at home?
No, not really. I mean, I don't know. We've had various of our designs that I would have really liked to have had in my home. And again, it's not, that's not to say I haven't used any. Certainly some of the early ones we did were kind of furniture sized, and that was difficult. I've used various of the later ones in our home. Uh-oh. Why not take this call? Sorry. I think the fact that I could make them and use them in the home certainly made it easier, but it's not a killer distinction to me.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
okay. If there's no more pressing questions, then I think we've pressed on Bill's time enough already.
I kind of got stuff to do, but this has been really fun.
Yeah, it was amazing. It was well worth the wait.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bill, and thank you so much everyone for coming, and please come again. We've kind of gone bi-weekly now. We used to be weekly, but now we're bi-weekly. So next week, we're at a special time, 4 p.m. So if you haven't already signed up on Eventbrite, go there.
If anybody does any yo-yo machine, I think I'd be.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. I'm happy to have a discussion about that.
Yeah, again, we do have some kits. If you get in contact, we can see if we have something we can send you. And just please tell us if you do something. And also, if we ever get out of lockdown, don't forget to invite me down in person.
Of course. Well, we'll show you off all our yo-yo kits in person. We'll bring them all to the lab, and it'll be an assignment.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Yep. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.